our Saturdays together because one of the things that we get to do is to talk to Leith Van Onselen. You can read Leith's excellent work at macrobusiness.com.au. It comes out every day. It's a finance or economical, I don't mean that in terms of the value of it, but that's the subject matter, newsletter with opinion, really good opinion that we love here, and I know from your feedback you love as well, macrobusiness.com.au. And we have a chat on a Saturday morning. I'm delighted to say that Leith Van Onselen is there. How are you, mate?
Good, thanks, Luke. How about yourself?
I'm travelling very well. It's I don't know what sort of week you think it's been, but I saw our fearless treasurer get to his feet and say, 0.1% growth. It's a good thing. It means that the budget's perfect. And then you hear other people say, well, hang on, no, that's not exactly right. We've undershot what the market expected. And I know you and I have been talking for a long time about the per capita recession that we are in. I think we've had a negative per capita for five times now in a row with these figures. So for people that aren't aware of GDP and what growth should be and per capita GDP, can you give us a 101 and how we end up at the end of these numbers?
Yeah, so basically GDP, just think about it as the economic activity of Australia. So we had the weakest annual economic growth in the country outside of the brief lockdown during the pandemic since the early 1990s recession. So it certainly isn't a weak economy, but that also has to be taken into context. So as we all know, we're running this very high immigration program. So Australia's population is growing incredibly quickly, almost its fastest rate since the early 1950s. So we've got this very, very weak economy, which is the weakest since, as I said, the early 1990s. At the same time, we've got the strongest population growth in close to 70 years. Now, it was a little bit stronger in the December quarter, but it's still at that very high level. And what this basically means is that everyone's sliced of the pie, which is what really matters. And unfortunately, this is one thing I hate about the economics profession. I hate about the way the media reports it. I hate the way the Australian Bureau of Statistics reports on it. They never talk about the overall economy. So they always talk about it GDP. So you always hear this GDP number about it around. All it is the overall economy's activity. And it's pretty irrelevant to you and me because we don't really care how much Australia grows in aggregate. We care about what our share of that growth is.
Yeah.
And that is where the data is absolutely abysmal. So as you alluded to, the economy grew by 1.1% overall, but we had population growth of, nearly 2.5%. So what it effectively meant was that we went backwards by 1.3% over the year, which again was the worst read since the early 1990s recession. It was actually 5 consecutive quarters now that Australia's growth has gone backwards in per capita terms. And that's actually the longest period of per capita economic decline on record since 1973. Now, it's not the largest decline. We had a bigger one in the early 90s recession, but, we haven't had 5 consecutive quarters since the start of the, modern record since 1973.
And can I make the point or ask you this question at least? When we go into recession, it's when we have 2 consecutive negative quarters, but that's overall GDP, aggregate. Is that right? Aggregate.
That's right.
Right.
Yeah.
So we've had 5 quarters per capita. We haven't had any aggregate, but that shows you how important the personal impact or the personal share of the pie is, because it's been like that for over a year now.
That's right. And the ridiculous thing about it is, we often heard in the lead up to the pandemic, obviously the pandemic shot it to bits, that Australia was this miracle economy that hadn't had a recession since the early 90s. And that we were world beaters. It was like the, world record run and all this sort of stuff. The problem with it is Australia ran pretty much the highest immigration program over that period. Well, at least, this century. And that we actually had a lot of per capita declines over that period. We had, multiple. But because we ran this very strong population growth policy, which most other countries don't do, it basically allowed us to paper over the economic weakness of the country and make it look better than it is when per head our living standards are actually getting a lot worse, especially, and GDP is a pretty useless figure, I've got to say. It's just economic activity, right? So you can for example, my house is perfectly good, right? It's in decent condition. But if I decided I want a slightly better house, I could knock down my house and build another house where this house currently stands. And the knockdown of this house would raise GDP, right? The removal of all the rubble would raise GDP. The building of the new house would raise GDP. But at the end of it, you've still just got a house, right? So you're actually no better off. And that's effectively what GDP is it's not a great measure. And obviously, when you run this high population growth policy, as we do, we have to build a whole bunch of infrastructure and all this other stuff that we wouldn't need otherwise. And when you build that infrastructure, that adds to GDP. So it's considered a benefit when actually it's really a cost if you're just building this stuff to merely keep up with population growth, which is what we do. So, you got to take it all with a grain of salt. And one of the hilarious things that happened this week is that our esteemed Reserve Bank Governor, Michelle Bullock, fronted Senate estimates literally about an hour before the national accounts came out on Wednesday. And one of the Liberal senators, I think it was Jane Hume, asked her, about this per capita recession. And she just basically said, it's not a very useful measure. No, it doesn't matter. And which I think is just hilarious, because that is the measure that does matter. Yeah. It's the aggregate GDP that doesn't matter. Yeah. And I would love to live in a world if I could change. Well, if I could change a lot of things in economics, I'd change. But one of the key things I'd change if I could, Luke, is I'd force the the Australian Bureau of Statistics, to report as the headline figure whenever it releases the national accounts per capita GDP. So instead of reading Australia's economy grows 0.1% in the March quarter, which is what it says on the media release and on its website and everything. That's the thing everyone focuses on. It should have said Australia's economy declines by per capita. Australia's economy declines by 0.4% in March quarter, because that's the per capita result, and that's what matters to us. Because Australia could have perpetual, very strong population growth if we wanted to. If we wanted to import 1 million people every year, we could have very solid growth, and it would look good on the surface. The problem is once you divide the pie amongst small people, everyone slice the pie would shrink. So is that really what we want, and does that make us better off as people? I don't think it does.
That is the best explanation, by the way, the replacing of your house. I've ever heard of that. Until you said that, I didn't think of it that way, but I think a lot of us, we get a lot from speaking from you, but that in particular is very helpful. I sent you yesterday a release that I was sent from RMIT, that university, I think, in Melbourne, from someone there who says the Australian economy is virtually at a standstill according to the latest ABS data. An RMIT expert says population growth via immigration is one force preventing a recession. And they say the fact that immigration has helped prevent Australia from sliding into a recession is not surprising. That's what you were just talking about there. So this is avoiding a recession through high immigration. This is not anti-migrant, by the way. This is, as I always say, about the mathematics of it and government's inability to add to our population without hurting the rest of us. That's what that's all about. But can anyone say that the only thing saving our economy from going backwards is immigration and higher population? What do you say when you see something like that?
Oh, look, it's factually correct. The problem is often when that line's run, it's actually defensive running a very high immigration program. They sort of say, look, if we didn't have this high immigration program, we'd be in recession, therefore it's good. Again, it gets back to this stupid way of measuring the economy. I mean, who cares if the economy's growing if everyone's sliced the pie shrinking? And it's not really, one of the problems is, Luke, I went to the Australian Treasury in 2003, worked there for 3 years. And as soon as you arrive at the Treasury, or at least back then, we were drilled in this thing which Treasury called the 3 Ps. So it's population, participation, productivity. Those are the 3 things that they said was basically drives well-being in the economy. The problem is only 2 of those things are actually relevant, and that's that's participation and productivity. Productivity is number 1. You obviously want to do things better. And participation basically means you got more people, working in the economy than not working, and participating in the economy. Those 2 things matter.
Yeah.
The third one, which is population, which is basically just immigration, is completely irrelevant to well-being, because again, you can just grow your population by 2% every year and you'll get roughly 2% growth, but it doesn't make you better off. And unfortunately, Australia's governments, the Australian Treasury, all the policymakers, everything has just focused on the one that doesn't matter, the one P that doesn't matter, which is immigration, the population growth, while they've ignored the other two, which are productivity and dissipation. And so we've got this broken economic model in Australia whereby we're just basically shoveling more people in. Those people work and spend, and then that grows the economy, but we're not better off per person, especially when you factor in all these other issues like having to live in smaller, more expensive housing, having more traffic congestion, and all those livability type things. So it's just a broken economic model we've got in Australia, and I think it's really showing through these numbers.
Before you go, Canada's central bank has cut interest rates. Does the RBA or give a toss, and does that have any effect on us and their thinking here?
Yeah, look, it does sort of show you what needs to happen in Australia for Australia to cut interest rates. Look, I'd argue that Canada is arguably the most similar economy in the world to Australia. We're both commodity exporters. We both rely on one country. Ours is China. Theirs is the US. We've got a very similar banking system, similar parliamentary system. We run a similar economic model. So if you think our immigration's nuts, Canada is even worse. They just run massive immigration. They've got low productivity growth. A lot of the same stuff, and unbelievable rental crisis like we do in Australia. A lot of similarities. The big difference is that Canada's unemployment rate has shot up more than ours, and also Canada's inflation rate has fallen by more than ours. So what it basically tells you is the RBA is likely to follow suit as soon as the unemployment rate rises a bit higher and or inflation falls, which is pretty logical. I mean, I'm not saying any great revelations there, but I wouldn't be surprised. We seem to be about 6 months behind Canada in a lot of things, the way I've been following it, and I wouldn't be surprised if in about 6 months we probably follow their lead. And we'll get our first taste this week when the next labour force release for May is released.
Okay. So we'll know the unemployment number, and that will impact what the RBA is thinking.
Yes, it will, but I'm not expecting actually a rise in the unemployment rate this month because we got a big rise last month, and they tend to go, a jump up and then it retraces a bit, jump up, retraces. So, it's very volatile.
Say good day to your fan Roger, who's listening not on the telephone, but if you were to say good day, Roger, I think that would make his day.
G'day, Roger. Thanks for listening, mate. Speak to you next week.
We've got an economist doing shout-outs. My God, what's going on? Love to chat, mate. Look after yourself. And
no worries, mate.
We'll talk soon. You're a star. Thank you. Leith Van Onselen, macrobusiness.com.au.
As a